Hey everyone, and welcome back to another tutorial with me, Benjamin Krudwig. And today I wanted to just jump right in, and what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to bind off today. In my previous video, you saw that I did the knitting basics of casting on 2 different ways, and I also showed you how to knit and purl, and how to interchange those 2 stitches to create stockinette stitch, which is what we're looking at right here. So this particular swatch is 3 stitches of just knitting back and forth, 30 stitches of stockinette, and then ending with 3 stitches knitting back and forth. So this is what stockinette fabric looks like. This is about what a swatch would look like. Normally I would maybe knit about twice the height of this, but for the purposes of today's video, this is going to be just fine. So I'm not going to teach you multiple ways to bind off in this video because there are a ton of different methods. I'm just going to show you the basic method that I use, and that's just what we're going to get through today. Before I get started in the tutorial, please be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't already. I've noticed that there's about 91% of you who are watching these videos who are not yet subscribed, so if you wanted to go ahead and do that, that would be super helpful. Also, please go ahead while you're there, hit the bell icon, that way you get notified every single time I post a video. And let's get started. Alright, so to bind off, it's actually quite easy, and I like to keep my yarn on the ball, or whatever, like however you're knitting it from. If you're doing a center pull ball or a hand wound ball, it doesn't really matter as long as it's still attached. You don't want to cut your yarn too early when you are binding off. This can lead to some issues with not having enough yarn when you bind off. Now, to bind off, it's really simple. First, I like to bunch my stitches up at the end here. That way I just have all the work in my hand and ready to bind off. For the first 2 stitches, we're just going to knit, right? So I'll just show how to knit again. We're going to insert the needle into the stitch behind the other needle and coming in from the same direction. And I am going to yarn over and knit that stitch. Then I'm going to do the same with the second stitch. So now I have 2 stitches on my right hand needle or my working needle, and the rest of my stitches on my left hand needle, or what I like to call the stationary needle. What we're going to do now, and this is kind of complicated, is we are going to pull that first stitch up and over the other stitch that we did, the second stitch that we did, leaving the second stitch on there. So let me do that again. We're going to knit the next stitch. Alright, so we have the stitch that we just did, and then the first one that we did. And we're going to take this first one here, pull it up and over that last stitch that we just did. Now if you're using these types of stitch markers, you need to remove them while you bind off, otherwise you will maybe accidentally lock them into your knitting and you'll have to rip it out, so that's not fun. Alright, so let's keep going. We're going to knit the next stitch, and then we're going to pull that other stitch up and over that last stitch that we just did. Knit a stitch, pull that stitch over. And I like to keep a fairly loose tension when I'm doing this. That way it stays somewhat stretchy and it doesn't tighten up too much. Okay, so I just place the yarn when I'm doing my yarn over, knit a stitch, pull over that first stitch over the second stitch that we did. And we're just going to do that all the way across. Again, being very gentle with my yarn. I'm not tightening it up. However, say this stitch gets a little loose, I might tighten up just a little bit. So like if you were knitting and then put your yarn down or your product down while you were binding off, that could happen. However, if you're binding off a project and it's not that many stitches, try to bind off all in one session. Otherwise, it can it can lead to some tension problems later on. So essentially this is just like knitting a row. However, you're basically pulling stitches off or looping them. This is a lot like how a single crochet works, where you pop a loop over another loop. Or at least it feels like that sometimes when you're chain stitching or slip stitching. Alright, so I've come to another one of my stitch markers. I'm just going to drop that off and finish off these last couple of stitches. So now I've got one stitch left here. I'm going to still knit that stitch, yarn over, and now I just have one single loop on this needle. So what I'll do is extend that loop, cut off a tail from the yarn, and I'm going to pull it through that loop, tighten it down. And that is how you bind off with a basic bind off stitch. And you'll see it has a nice finished edge on the top there. Still has some stretch, not a lot of stretch. I'll teach you how to bind off when you do ribbing in the video on ribbing. But it's about as stretchy as the cast on. So what I would do now at this point is wash this in some warm water and some wool soap and just kind of lay it flat to dry and block it on a blocking mat. And there's a finished knit swatch that is bound off. Thank you so much for watching. I know that was a short video, but that's all you really need to know to finish off a project. Of course, you'd want to weave in your ends just by sewing the ends in through the knit fabric. And you want to do that before you wash any of your finished projects. But yeah, enjoy that tutorial. And again, if you like this tutorial, please give this a thumbs up down below. Make sure that you subscribe to my channel, and if you'd like to support the channel in another way, you can always sign up for my Patreon, and there are lots of goodies over there and a few different ways that you can support me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day whenever you watch this, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!